Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here at the Damage Report. We've got two things that are the same thing, actually. We've got an awesome guest joining us and a bit of a throwback to the early days of the Damage Report as we are joined once again by Dan from the internet. Dan Evans, how's it going?
Hello, welcome, fans, lovers, all the people who are here. It's amazing people can see the complete growth of me from being afraid of the camera to now assuming that I have fans loving to watch me on screen. This is what you've done to me, John. It's good to be with you.
That was a lot of self-analysis all in one go there, but it's good to know who you are. I'm glad that we can do that. For people who might not know, Dan was originally, I mean not originally, but at one step in his life was a producer. He had other steps before that, but he was a producer for the Damage Report, and has joined us as a guest multiple times throughout the pandemic. So always glad to have you back. Now, Dan, you of course have your own shows, so why don't you tell people about those?
A couple things here and there. Currently, there's Power Report. You can check it out. Just follow me at Dan from the Web on Twitter, and I have the links to everything. But Power Report, I do the podcast every 2 weeks, kind of doing like a Sunday show kind of thing, but trying to include the perspectives of people from the left, people of color, just trying to make that cool. Then there's my music podcast, Audio Face. I release that every week. It's just a music review show that occasionally ends up having to break news about sexual harassers in the LA indie community, but that's a totally different thing. Fun times, and but also we cover music news and we review albums every single week. So it's actually supposed to be like my break from things. It's really fun.
That's awesome.
And no, yeah, I just love being on the Damage Report as well. So that's pretty much all I got right now.
Glad to have you here. That's actually why we have you on, is because obviously I devote so much of the Damage Report to music news, and analyzing what's going on in the musical world. People were really mad last Friday. So we were talking about the death of the Prince and then DMX, and I referred to him as a singer, and people had a lot of problems with that. I get that it's not that he doesn't sing. I get it. It was just a slip up. I listened to DMX growing up, everybody, just relax. Anyway, sure. Don't worry. Those sorts of mistakes will not happen from Dan. You're gonna have very respectful coverage of the music community. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us here for this show. We've got a lot to cover in the next hour, including updates and the story of Daunte Wright, which we talked about yesterday on the show. John Boehner gets even more open about what he thinks about some people in politics. Just a fun little story. We're going to try to figure out what empathy means in regards to conservatives, how it functions, when it functions, and for whom it functions. We've got updates on Afghanistan, updates on the 5G Wi-Fi chips that are now circulating through my bloodstream. Turns out they might have some issues. We'll be talking about that. And Nikki Haley's massive flip-flop when it comes to the 2024 presidential race. That's gonna be fun. Not because I care at all about her, I honestly don't, but I have a feeling that a lot of people are gonna be taking the same path that she has. So with that said, everyone, thank you for being here. Please hit the like button, share the stream if you haven't already. And as Dan and I talk about the news, you can send us tweets and super chats and comments on Twitch and all of that, and we'll respond as we go. Did want to let you know two things, and I'll be reminding you throughout the program. One is that after the Damage Report, you can see another episode of Deep Dive with Jordan Uhl. That's twitch.tv/TYT at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. So just a little bit after our program, you head over to Twitch, you'll see Deep Dive, Jordan Uhl, always a lot of fun. Also, early heads up that as we do each year, we're gonna be having a massive Earth Day special. So save the date for Earth Day special. It's Thursday, April 22nd, conveniently on Earth Day. So that should make it a little bit easier to remember. At 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. We're gonna be going through what Biden has done so far on the environment, leftover damage from the Trump administration. We're gonna have a rep on from the Sunrise Movement to talk about the path to a Green New Deal. We're gonna be giving credit to youth climate activists from around the world and having a little bit of fun besides, as we're joined by a number of different awesome guests. So you're not gonna wanna miss that, and it's coming up 2 Thursdays from now. So definitely sketch that out in your calendar. That said, Dan, ready to do this thing?
Absolutely. I'm a little biased, but the Earth Day special and that and Jordan Uhl, both very good folks. You don't want to miss that.
Awesome, I agree. Okay, everybody, hold on to your butts. The news is about to get rough. Yesterday, we talked about the most recent needless officer killing of a black man. This is Daunte Wright being killed in Brooklyn Center. We gave you some of the details as they were developing, but even as our show was going on, new details were coming out. And so we wanted to update you on a few of those, including that the officer who killed Daunte Wright has been identified. This is Officer Kim Potter, a 26-year veteran of the Brooklyn Center Police Department, identified as the person who fired a bullet in a 20-year-old Daunte Wright's chest. She's been placed on standard administrative leave. So they really gave it to her with the standard administrative leave after she killed him. So how did it happen? Well, they have an explanation or an excuse, depending on how you look at it. So let's go to some video of the Brooklyn Center Police Chief Tim Gannon trying to explain.
As you can hear, the officer, while struggling with Mr. Wright, shouts, "Taser, taser," several times. That is part of the officer's training prior to deploying a taser, which is a less lethal device. That is done to make her partners aware, as well as the subject, that a taser deployment will be imminent. During this encounter, however, the officer drew their handgun instead of their taser. For informational purposes, we train with our handguns on our dominant side and our taser on our weak side. So if you're right-handed, you carry your firearm on your right side and you carry your taser on the left. This is done purposefully and is trained. As I watch the video and listen to the officer's commands, it is my belief that the officer had the intention to deploy their taser, but instead shot Mr. Wright with a single bullet. This appears to me, from what I viewed and the officer's reaction and distress immediately after, that this was an accidental discharge that resulted in the tragic death of Mr. Wright.
Okay, Dan. We were wondering what the explanation was going to be, what the excuse was, what the reason why we shouldn't have an issue with the needless murder. So what do you think about this? She only meant to tase him, but somehow shot him in the chest.
Pardon me, John, because I've dealt through some of these things so often from a news perspective, and also just like as a person of color, I have to take these things with an amount of like dark humor, because if I deal with these things every single week, it's gonna break me. But like, it just feels like they're pulling from some sort of game where you spin a wheel of excuses or some kind from things that cops do. I mean, like you have it in your notes here, so sorry to jump forward, but like in Oakland, California, in just in 2009, the Oscar Grant case, it was a huge thing for people who are local to the area. I have family up there, so I knew about it. And that was the same excuse that was used then, that he was meant to fire a taser, but instead used a gun. And so we've heard that excuse. We've heard he was resisting arrest, or we've heard all these other different instances, but the hierarchical like main issue over here is the dehumanization of black and brown bodies at the hands of police. The fact that we send people with guns into these cases like a routine traffic stop. Like one of the more heartbreaking aspects of it is like, I believe one of the reasons for the being pulled over was that he had something like hanging from his mirror or whatever. Like John, I don't know if you remember, but like when I first started working like in the remote studio at TYT before a damage report for the car park near the office, we got these little hang tags for the for our like parking garage. And I was driving back home with that one in the early days, and I went to visit my uncle, and my uncle was like, "You absolutely can't have that hang tag on your car because the police will pull you over." Like, not only is that like the kind of thinking that my uncle and like people who care about me as black people like have to have at all times, like vigilantly, but I have to actually take that seriously because of the number of times that being pulled over at the hands of police is something that ends up being deadly. So it's just like another line of excuses here that gets away from the central issue that we don't need armed people to be handling these situations with unarmed people, especially when there's this dehumanization angle to it, because it so often ends poorly.
You're 100% right. Yeah, I honestly don't even understand the hanging thing. Why you're not allowed to have something hanging? Doesn't everybody have things hanging in their car?
I mean, like I asked this too because I was like, well, I've seen people have like different necklaces or things of spiritual significance, like dream catchers, or maybe even like a handicap or disabled placard for parking. So it's like, what is this issue? But like at a certain point, even I know to stop asking for the logic in these things because like there is no logic to the unfortunately more than I can count on one hand times that like officers have pointed a gun at me for like a thing I didn't do. And I just have to like act calm and like regular in that kind of situation. And there is no logic to it. The only logic I've like found through my own experience, through covering this in news so often, is that there's a fundamental dehumanization that happens at like a mental level with these people that I just strongly don't believe that for a traffic stop, it wouldn't have escalated to the point where if this person were white, that you would have tried to handcuff them or like try to aim your gun at them, whether it's taser or handgun, you're caught up in the moment, I don't care. You're just not gonna treat people you have a human connection to in a certain way.
Yeah, why are you tasing him?
Yeah, for what? He's unarmed. This is another case, like unfortunately these things happen so often that this is another case where the girlfriend and like there was another like child like nearby in the car watching this whole thing. So like now we're like bringing a dangerous weapon into a situation now these other people involved. Again, I have a hard time believing that if this cop had happened to pull over their relative or something, that this thing would have happened in any kind of way. It's a 100%. Humanization aspect. Do you see these people as people like you that you could be friends with, or do you see these people as others? And again, the numbers and the bodies keep piling up, so I have my answer.
Exactly. Now, the explanation that they gave for Kim Potter's killing of Daunte Wright, that she just meant to tase him, which she shouldn't have done, but accidentally grabbed a gun and shot him, as many have pointed out, is unacceptable in only about 1,000 ways. Now, I am not an expert, I'm not a cop, I'm not a 26-year-old veteran, but wait, I conflated those two things. Apparently you can be a 26-year veteran on the police force and not be an expert on any of this, because you just see any weapon is the same. Who's to say? I fired guns. I know that taking something off my belt that's like 5 times heavier than a taser, it's probably gonna register a little bit. That's gonna be different. That has a different safety that you presumably have to activate to shoot. How could you not know that? That's madness. And if you can't tell, you should have never had it. Your trainer should be in some trouble, and you definitely should never have a gun or a taser again. Now, many people have made these points, so I will just add, when you say, oh, she meant to tase him, but she accidentally shot him, I say, oh, good, so now we know why she should go to jail. That's a good reason for her to go to jail, because if I'm driving down the street and I accidentally look at my phone and I run someone down and they die, I didn't mean to do that, but I still have to go to jail because there's consequences for actions. That my phone is the reason for it, in the same way that her wanting to tase him is the reason. Neither of them justifies murder. So that's why Kim Potter should be in prison. Even if we accept that stupid, inane excuse that they gave, she killed a person, there are consequences for actions. There was no excuse whatsoever to do that. Worst case scenario, he'd gotten away, God forbid, but at least in that case, no one was murdered. So yes, I've accepted your excuse, and now you should go to prison for it in the same way that anyone else who'd accidentally shot someone to death would go to. That's it. That's really, I don't see what other commentary there is. You killed a person you shouldn't have, you should be in jail for it. Any thoughts on that? Like that you could pull it and not know that it's, oh wait, oh this is a black pistol, this isn't a bright yellow taser.
Yeah, like never mind the inherent disrespect that comes from saying that this is a 26-year-old veteran who can't tell the feeling in the hand of a taser, which is like light and sort of plasticky, versus a handgun that's much heavier. I love how they expect us to have that kind of double think in there kind of inherently. But no, let me give you an argument that like you're not gonna hear anywhere else, because like the Republicans gonna go to this side and the Democrats gonna go to this side. But like, if you've ever been a gun owner, or you've like fired a gun or learned how to shoot guns at like a very basic level, the kind of basic training that we're kind of trying to require on like state or a federal level in order to get these weapons, you know that like one of the first things you're taught is that you never fire or like hold your weapon towards something you don't plan to destroy or kill. All right, like that's something you learn at a very basic level. So don't tell me that someone with 26 years of experience in the force doesn't understand what they were doing at like a psychological level.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, really fast, I wanna go to one last bit of video. As the initial details were coming out yesterday, with the killing by Officer Kim Potter of Daunte Wright. Joe Biden was asked about this, and I want to give you a little bit of what he had to say.
Watched, I assume as I did, the film, which is fairly, the body cam, which is fairly graphic. The question is, was it an accident? Was it intentional? That remains to be determined by a full-blown investigation. But in the meantime, I want to make it clear again, there is absolutely no justification, none, for looting, no justification for violence. Peaceful protest, understandable.
It's always amazing what there is justification for and not. And you saw it, like usually they at least separate these two things, but right there Biden's like, murder, maybe justified, maybe not. Looting, never, under any circumstances. And again, looting's not what's going on. There's protests asking for accountability with the cops. So instantly, any protest, any gathering is talked about as a looting riot. That's what it's described as. But that totally out, can never happen. Stealing, after all, you can never get the thing back. Murder, easy to get the person back. So anyway, as a first response, Dan, from Biden, I found that to be at best weak and at worst playing into the way that the right wing is going to be talking about this case, and I'm sure already has been.
Yeah, John, I mean, like you and I both, as people who are supporting Bernie Sanders in the primary, kind of expected that we would get this weak action kind of across the board from Joe Biden in issues relating from like healthcare to police reform or anything relating to this. And we know that he's gonna kind of revert back into his idea of I'm the great unifier. We know that Trump led, I think he thinks that a lot of the violence was associated with the Trump era and he can keep it packed into the Trump era and try to be seen as this great leader. But it is, to me, that's an assumption that's very much caught up in the ego of Joe Biden and the legacy building that presidents kind of do from day one once they get into office, whether they want to admit it or not, and less rooted in the real struggles that African Americans, brown people, indigenous people, everyone's kind of feeling in this country right now at the hands of the police. Like, that's another point. We talked about the original like killing that's going on and the context of dehumanization of people and how there's no way that Kim Porter would have possibly like had that same reaction to she wouldn't have had that same reaction where it's someone she knew, right? But at that same time, there's a dehumanization in this conversation about looting, right? Because it's always, like you said, John, murder, bad, maybe cop did it. I don't know. Even though this is a thing that happens so often that we have to go through a song and dance about it. Murder, maybe, I don't know, but please no looting. Please know that. It's, again, dehumanization, because what's implicit there is that black people, brown people, indigenous people, people who have been victimized, working class white people who are like don't have privilege in these like communities where the police kind of control things based on class and stature, right? Anybody in America who is victimized by police is going to, expected by the Democratic Party implicitly, to just continue accepting it, accepting no change, accepting no movement on anything at all. And they're also expected to not get angry, to not get upset, because the looting and all that's happening, I've said this before, like last year, I'll say it again. I don't like support that as a first measure of action. I think there are radical moves you can take in activism and pressuring politicians and like local officials to do more tangible things than breaking through properties that are oftentimes owned by people of color. But that's an expression of frustration because the usual like methods of acting within a political system are no longer working. When you see constant like rioting and looting, that's a sign of a failing political state. And again, in the context of this dehumanization of people of color, it's very clear that Joe Biden and his sort of regime within the Democratic Party aren't interested in tackling these bigger structural issues.
Yeah, like returning the soul of America apparently doesn't have anything to do with stopping the cops from killing people. That's a different soul, I guess. It's not America's soul. Yeah, and the cops will always say, no, okay, yeah, so like we goofed and we killed someone, but like everybody just calm down and just go away. We'll take care of it, because that always works well. You always get justice when everybody just waits patiently. Look about like Derek Chauvin. It's like maybe there's a chance after a year of protests that maybe they'll get him. Anyway, so like you train people that if they do what you tell them to do, if they're quiet, if they're silent, if they protest in the way that Fox News is comfortable with, they have been trained to know that they will get absolutely nothing from that. So you would have to be insane to think that that is what they will continue to do.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Over on Fox News, Jesse Waters apparently just had a child and he's out on leave as a result of that, which gives conservatives an opportunity to do something, evolve in the very narrow specific circumstance where something affects them. So let's take a look at a video of Jesse Waters talking about that and then we'll get into it.
My father said just today, Jesse, you better get back on the 5 pretty soon. Your replacements have been really good. I was like, thanks, Dad. But now I'm pro paternity. I used to mock people for taking paternity. I used to think it was a big ruse, but now I wish I could take 6 weeks, but I don't know. Apparently, I have people nipping at my heels, so I gotta be back.
Look at him.
That entire segment is just unbearable, by the way, but they're a great group of people, so they seem really fun. But anyway, Dan, now that he has taken paternity leave, he suddenly understands why someone would want to do that. And he apparently has changed his position on it. What do you think?
I mean, this is consistent in American politics, at least in my life's history, as long as back when in the mid 2000s, when being pro or against same-sex marriage was a major issue in the country's politics. It wasn't until certain Republicans realized that they had relatives who were coming out as gay or lesbian or along the spectrum that they realized that, oh wow, these are people that I care about and I want them to just be happy. So maybe I should support this legislation that allows that to occur and allows equal treatment within the laws of this country. It's amazing, these little moments, here and there happen when you watch Fox News kind of in isolation, and you can think, oh wow, what is like, are any of these people actually real, or are they just like kind of riffing, punching a clock in 24/7? But I mean, the sad thing is like, they're saying this right now and it means nothing. It's gonna be kind of like throwaway banter that like, yeah, us on the left are gonna do this. But like when the next time he's on and he's like talking about universal healthcare or restricting healthcare access for a bunch of people, he is not going to cite, oh, but I think we should actually say that, oh, no Medicare for all. We should definitely include paid paternity care, like paid maternity leave or something like that. He's not gonna then pull into his experience, at least I doubt this. He's not gonna pull into his experience and actually adapt that to political beliefs, because that's a little bit too much learning and a little bit too much empathy than the paycheck will allow.
I agree. If this is terrible in multiple levels. So if he was being totally honest and he actually changed as a result of this, this would be yet another demonstration that there's something fundamentally broken in American conservatives and probably conservatives internationally, but I only know about the American example, where they can't have any empathy unless something happens to them or someone very close to them, which sucks And seems ironic when almost every one of these people say that they've been raised almost always in conservative Christian churches that teach empathy and morality and all of these rules for being good people. And yet they don't feel they have a need to be good people until something actually affects them. That said, that's sort of a myth anyway. All of these things that supposedly are core to conservative Christianity might be theoretically, but nothing is more core than learning hierarchy and learning that there are circles of who you should care about. People who are like you in as many ways as possible are the ones you care about. The farther you get away from that, the less you actually have to care. But as Dan said, he's not gonna learn. He's not gonna be suddenly advocating for paternity leave, and he's only gonna support Republican politicians, none of whom actually support it. So that's worthless. He's probably lying anyway. But there's a third layer to how BS this is. So we're supposed to believe that Jesse Waters has now learned about the importance of bonding with your kid. He had to be taught that. Bear in mind, he had twins 10 years ago. This isn't even his first kid. So what with the twins? No, I don't want to bond with them. I don't need paternity leave. Now, look, you got to do a little bit of digging as you find out that he had the twins in a previous marriage. His wife divorced him because he cheated with a producer on his show, and the new kid is with that woman he cheated with. So it's a bit of a tawdry story, but he already had kids to learn from and didn't, notably. But this isn't just about Jesse Waters. You might remember earlier this year, Meghan McCain, new mother, returned to her co-hosting slot on The View for the first time since giving birth last fall. She'd planned to come back before the election, she explained, but unexpected medical complications, quote, kicked my butt and doubled her time out of the office. The extension prompted a light bulb moment, quote, as I thought about it, the more angry I got that there weren't women in the rest of America that had the same kind of luxury that I had. It takes personal experience sometimes to get on board. For you and people like you, it takes that experience. I've never given birth to anyone and I'm not likely to, but I already get that it would be rough and that you'd probably want the time off. I can have empathy for people in all sorts of life experiences that I'm not in. It's not difficult for some people. Maybe as a country, we should try to figure out why it's difficult for some and see if maybe we can fix that. Because I don't think that increasing the net supply of empathy in America would be a bad thing. It's actually kind of a laudable goal. Maybe Meghan McCain could not, like with a difficult path, learn this very specific lesson about maternity leave. Maybe she could learn something a little bit broader about caring about people who aren't like you, who are having life experiences you haven't had. I sort of doubt that she had that. I certainly doubt that Jesse Waters had that. Any other thoughts, Dan?
John, that was excellently said. I just have 2 quick points. I found that pretty consistently that the difference between, progressives, people on the left, and people who call themselves liberal or, Democrats or even Republicans is usually how far their empathy goes. Because usually in these conversations, you find out that the empathy doesn't extend for other groups of people because there's like a disconnect between how far people are from each other. When I still like the thing that Bernie Sanders said all this time, like months ago now, like fighting for someone you don't know. Like I think that's more American than anything else. Other thing, who wouldn't watch Real Housewives of cable news? Like I did not know anything about that like drama that was going on behind the scenes there. But like there's that. You can go into the Mika Brzezinski Morning Joe stuff. Like there's a lot of weird things. Of course, there's also a lot of like really terrible things happening, like a lot of harassment at Fox News as well. But there's a lot of weird stuff going on at cable news, man.
Yeah. Maybe someday we'll be able to do another chapter in Jesse Waters' experience of. I'm not saying he still harasses. I'm just saying, hypothetically, I'm just saying, dude's got some issues. Seems to only care about himself. Anyway, finally, I'll add, according to a 2019 report by UNICEF, which analyzed which of the world's richest countries are most family friendly, Estonia leads the field for new mothers with over 80 weeks of leave at full pay. At the bottom of the table, we're number 1, United States. Grand total of 0 weeks, the only country in the analysis that offered absolutely no national paid leave. Now, this is insane. Certainly insane that we got through 4 years of Trump without it, but bear in mind, we also got through all those years of Obama, including the time where Democrats had unified control, and they do now too. Is anything being done? Doesn't seem like anything's being done. So this is the most obvious thing in the world that we need to fix. Will anyone ever fix it? Stay tuned for the next few decades of American politics. Now that said, let's roll right into a Dan request. Got this for you, Dan.
Thank you.
It seems almost quaint to think back on the time of John Boehner, such a different Republican Party, but some things are constants. And you're seeing one of those constants next to me. It is how objectionable to virtually everyone, including his family, Ted Cruz is. So I want to give you a little bit of John Boehner, who was on with Stephen Colbert, and they were playing a sort of rapid fire game of Stephen Colbert would name someone in politics. John Boehner would give his impression. So Ted Cruz did come up in that. Here it is.
President Clinton.
Best politician I've ever met.
President Biden.
Good guy. Really good guy. 30 years I've known him. There's nothing we couldn't work out.
Ted Cruz.
Lucifer in the flesh. The most miserable son of a bitch I ever had to deal with.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
Man, John Boehner, he had nice things to say about everyone from like kind of Obama to Dick Cheney, Clinton to George W, Trump even, Ted Cruz. F that guy, F him to hell. Dan, why did this stand out to you?
Because dunking on Ted Cruz is something I do before my breakfast. It's just something I love. You only find really the only people I know who are fans of Ted Cruz is Ben Shapiro, which is like says a whole different thing about both of them together. But no, I think not only does it help that find that every person, almost every sane person, Democrat and Republican, doesn't like working with Ted Cruz, knows he's a snake. This helps to kind of build kind of a persona that he can be run against from, that people can run against him with, hopefully, because it's very true. He just is a slimy, greasy person. But one of the things that I guess the whole John Boehner, I think he's an interesting figure for the transition period in between like the old school like Republicans, like the runoff from the Reagan days, the early 90s, 2000s neoliberal era into this Tea Party Trump kind of thing. Because a lot of John Boehner's House like leadership and his like off-reported drinking escapades were because of dealing with people like Ted Cruz and was dealing with the Tea Party and like their like wild demands. Like it would be like imagining if Nancy Pelosi was hitting Terminus, my favorite bar in San Francisco, every weekend after having to deal with AOC on Twitter. Like it just doesn't, it's like, we don't have that kind of thing anymore because that pressure really existed. There was a time in which there was a battle between factions within the Republican Party of, do we kind of do this quote unquote compassionate conservatism of George W. Bush, which is an inherently problematic framing to begin with, or do we go into this like more nativist, pseudo populist rhetoric of tougher on immigration, like distrust of progressive movements for like LGBTQ rights and Black Lives Matter. And it's really clear which side won. It's very clear which side won. So at least we're kind of seeing John Boehner right now. He's got like nothing else to lose except for like, really nothing else to lose except drink in his wine glass, let's say. And he's spilling it all. And it's confirming a lot of what we believe, except for, the other stuff he says about other politicians, which we'll get into in a bit.
Which we will, yeah. And I see someone saying, they're worried about sort of the rehabilitation of past politicians. No, we're not rehabilitating John Boehner. Screw John Boehner. John Boehner now making money as a weed lobbyist after supporting legislation that put God knows how many people, especially Black and brown people, behind bars for that. No, screw John Boehner. But John Boehner is mocking Ted Cruz, and I need that in my life right now because also, screw Ted Cruz. You were totally right to point out that the only person who likes him is Ben Shapiro. But let's note that Ben Shapiro is the Ted Cruz of right-wing media. Yeah, like there is a 5% chance that Ted Cruz is his dad. Like, come on, you know that there's at least a 5% chance. Anyway, Boehner also called Cruz a reckless a-hole who thinks he is smarter than everyone else. That is, I'm not, I guess telepathy wouldn't necessarily help. I can't say for sure that that's true, but I know that that's true. Ted Cruz definitely thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Most politicians do, but really, Ted Cruz does. He thinks that he has nailed the last 10 years, that he's going to make it past all this Trump stuff, them mocking him and his wife and everything, and then someday he will be president. Maybe he's right. Let's see if America is being outsmarted by Ted Cruz. Boehner called former President Donald Trump a little crazy, which is more of an indictment of Boehner than Trump, that he says a little crazy. But John Boehner, on with Stephen Colbert, had an interesting thing to say about Lindsey Graham. Take a look at this.
Lindsey Graham.
He's one of the funniest people you'll ever meet in your life.
Like funny, haha,
like
or funny, really, what is wrong with that guy?
No, like really funny, Stephen.
But what, can you explain, Lindsey Graham, how you can say that about, can you explain what the hell happened to him? He's baffling to even people who voted for him.
Well, Lindsey, he can kind of move a little right, move a little left. He's pretty good. He's a pretty good dancer, but he really is one of the funniest people I've ever met.
Lindsey Graham, great dancer. Okay.
So I included this video, Dan, for a very specific reason. I occasionally like to test bubbles and test whether my biases against people make me unreasonable. But I can't believe it and I can't accept it, Dan. What about you?
I think it has to do with a class analysis of politics, and that when you don't see these people for who they are, as in like vessels for preventing the working class and a lot of other people who are struggling with their American experience to having a chance at a better one, but people who you don't see them as people who are obsessed with their ego and looking out for themselves and their own families and their own wallets, essentially. But when you become a politician and you see these politicians as your friends and your allies and your people, then yeah, they're jokes that would be like horribly milquetoast and not funny to all of us outside of that bubble you're kind of alluding to, John. It just kind of seems repugnant. But there was, like we were talking about a little bit earlier with some of these Boehner clips, there's a little bit of, I think Boehner's telling a lot of his truth, but there's a little bit of coded language in there. Like he referred to Bill Clinton as one of the best politicians and for some phrase politicians that he's ever met, which is like damning with faint praise there. But like we knows what he means, like a flip flopper, and that's kind of the same thing. Lindsey Graham, Boehner's saying about Graham here is that he's a dancer, as Stephen Colbert kind of wrestled out of him a little bit. So to me, to the point that yeah, we shouldn't be glorifying John Boehner and these actions and all these different things, whereas using the fact that these people are egotistical vessels and want to spew their side of the story and have the last word all the time, based on what they're giving us, it's a look into how power sees itself and how insular it is. And that, I mean, to quote the great George Carlin phrase, it's a big club and we ain't in it.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and even that for you to be able to think that he's funny, you have to be able to, and you have to look past so much. Like I know you could probably think of people that they won't even really say anything yet, and you already are about to laugh just because you like them. You're predisposed to think you're funny, that they are funny. But there are also awful people that it doesn't matter what they say. You know who they are, what they stand for, what their values are, and you'd never think it was funny. Lindsey Graham is terrible. He is an absolutely terrible person. For me, he cannot be funny. You could say the exact same thing that from someone else would be hilarious and it just wouldn't work. But for John Boehner, there's nothing about Lindsey Graham that takes him out of the realm of comedy. It's totally good to go. And also, God only knows what those jokes are. It is entirely possible that for some conservatives, there are topics he's willing to talk about that are funny. Like we talked about in the pre-show. During his speech over the weekend, Donald Trump made a reference to Barack Hussein Obama and the very beautiful Michelle Obama, and the entire room began laughing like hyenas. They think that's funny, but that's not really a commentary on the joke. That's a commentary on the crowd and the person delivering it. So just bear that in mind. Again, not rehabilitating John Boehner. John Boehner still sucks. Maybe not as much as Ted Cruz. Big-ish announcement coming from President Biden, I suppose, on the future of the US conflict in Afghanistan, which I believe is older than our guest today. President Biden will withdraw all American troops from Afghanistan over the coming months. People familiar with the plan said, completing the military exit by the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks that first drew the United States into its longest war. He is expected to announce this on Wednesday. This will keep thousands of US forces in the country beyond the May 1st exit deadline that the Trump administration negotiated last year with the Taliban. So from my point of view, good news, bad news on extending past the May 1st deadline. It is bad news because in theory, we were supposed to be out within a few weeks and we're not gonna be. The good news though is they were never gonna do that anyway. It's all lies. I don't even trust the September 11th thing. So we're gonna report on it because it's news, but we didn't get to 20 years by always keeping to our commitments to draw down forces. They were able to find, Dan, some ways to bring troops back in. And until everyone's out of there and has been out of there for years, I'm not going to believe it, I don't think. What do you think? Like I said, this conflict is about as old as you are.
That's the terrible thing is that like I vaguely remember when I was just getting into politics, and I don't want to say how old that is because that's just gonna make me sound like a huge nerd. But like Bush was talking about Afghanistan troop withdrawals. I was very, very young at that time. And now I am almost actually a little more than double that age. Yeah. So let's just say I'll believe it when I see it. The Taliban, like I hesitate even to give any sort of like leeway for the military industrial complex. But sure, let's say there was some transition issues between like the Trump administration and the Biden administration, and the Biden administration needed more time to plan things out, the same way they needed more time to plan things out with the vaccine deployment because the Trump administration hadn't given them a plan to work with, apparently. Sure, maybe give them that, but it's possible. But Again, I've heard this from Republicans, I've heard this from Democrats about troop withdrawals, we're bringing the troops home, but then there's always caveats and extensions because ultimately war has evolved past the sense of like we have the troops. Now we just have like drone strikes and other covert operations and assassination attempts that we do with other countries or like aiding these other countries in doing these things. So our hands are clean from the mess. Like this is the new kind of war. This kind of war that can happen without congressional approval, that can happen that's contributes to our bloated defense budget. That's the reason why we can't have things like better infrastructure, better transportation, better healthcare. This is where it all kind of comes back home, quite literally. And so I hope for like the sense of the fate of the country and what we can do both domestically with that money, but also internationally, and not continuing to make generations of people who hate America. But I know that these forces like are much more powerful than Joe Biden, and I know that America is addicted to its political, political and military machine. So I'm holding my breath here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not holding my breath here because holding my breath would be a problem in this case.
That's true. Look, I have gotten predictions about Joe Biden very wrong. I said early on in the primary, Joe Biden, come on. So clearly I can get it wrong. That said, I think as president, if there are things that he can do that are very easy, he'll do them. Very hard, that's gonna be a lot more difficult. And this shouldn't be hard, but clearly it has been shown to be. So look, if we hit September 11th and there's not a single soldier there, that would be great. If we hit September 11th and in fact they've increased the numbers because, oh, what do you know, there was a bombing. Here, let me give you a spoiler. There will be bombings between now and September 11th, probably a great number of them. Or if there's no longer troops, but we have like specialists that stay behind to assist some force there. There's contractors, there's some other name that still means the US is spending money in Afghanistan. I'm going to be not exactly surprised. Now, right now, there are 2,500 US troops in Afghanistan still. Although the number fluctuates and is currently about 1,000 more than that. They're also up to an additional 7,000 foreign forces in the coalition. They're the majority of them NATO troops. That is a big military force decades after it began. And along the way, 100 times they've told us, well, if we leave, there could be chaos. So instead we will stay and there will be chaos year after year after year after year after we spend countless dollars. So good, if Biden does it, good, I guess. But like Dan, we'll see on September 11th. Okay, now the story that I know many people have been, okay, we have the poll results. Okay, well, let's see. Now that we have that update, and a couple more people have sent it in. So thank you for the breaking news update on Kim Porter. But no, we don't have the results. You tease, God damn it. Anyway, I'm kidding. Okay, so we'll have that later on. More time for people to fill it out by going to tyt.com/polls. Let's get that number up there. Of course, now with the breaking news, seems like it might bias the results, but we'll see together. Anyway, with that, let's jump to this. Yesterday on the show, I announced that I had just gotten the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So of course, news this morning, the US is going to be pausing the administration of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Apparently, after 6 recipients in the US developed a rare disorder involving blood clots within about 2 weeks of vaccination. So that was announced by federal health agencies, but it was picked up and run with by a number of governors. Within 2 hours of the announcement, Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio, a Republican, advised all health providers in his state to temporarily stop giving it. New York, Connecticut, Nebraska, and other states quickly followed suit. So it went from announcement from federal health agencies to a number of states actually stopping it almost instantaneously. We don't know much yet about what is happening, but we do know that all 6 recipients were women between the ages of 18 and 48. 1 woman died, and a second woman in Nebraska has been hospitalized in critical condition. So we're gonna give you more context, but Dan, immediate response to this, they are stopping it in a number of states, at least for now.
Yeah, I'd like to say in an era of a lot of confusion about the science of COVID-19 and even vaccines in general, I just like to say that this is part of science where I think it's a good reaction from the medical and scientific community to, even at this very broad scale, watch this very closely. And I know like millions of Johnson & Johnson doses have probably been like administered, but if they're even noticing 8 in these and they're halting it nationwide, that seems to believe that the government and Johnson & Johnson are trying to take this seriously, because obviously they want this rollout to end up leading to adverse side effects since it's a vaccine. So I would say countering a lot of people who this will usually fall into the, see, this is why I'm vaccine skeptical, or see that this is why I don't even trust the vaccines because it's all a hoax anyways. Like, I think we need to understand that the science hasn't been perfect through this, but part of the scientific process is constantly testing, constantly peer reviewing, and then constantly updating that knowledge. It's just that now we're having this happen out very publicly because it's a health emergency. I think it's important that people kind of get that clear just to begin with.
Yeah, oh God, it's difficult, but I would say that I feel a little bit different, and it's entirely possible that they have access to information that we don't have yet. That is entirely possible. That said, I'm not a doctor. Don't take medical advice from me. Don't take legal advice from me. Don't take financial advice from me. You know what? Don't take political advice from me. Honestly, don't take any advice. I'm not an expert. I talk into a camera on YouTube. That said, 1 woman died and another was hospitalized. There have been nearly 7 million doses administered in the US. Roughly 9 million more have been shipped out. That seems like really low odds. As people are pointing out in the chat, like hormonal birth control seems like it has a significantly higher chance of giving you blood clots than the vaccine. And my fear would be, so obviously the last thing they want is it continuing to go out, more people get blood clots, it turns into a huge story like the AstraZeneca one, and everybody is like scared away from the Johnson & Johnson shot. That's what they don't want. Here's my worry that I think a lot of people have. They're gonna pause it, okay. In a week, they started again. How do people feel about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? Let's say it's cleared. Let's say in a week, they're like, we looked into it. Those were all of the blood clots. The odds are literally a one in a million, or even worse than 1 in a million. People are so predisposed to be terrified. I don't know. I worry that they're like, there's no coming back, or there's no totally coming back from a decision like this. What do you think?
I don't think we're in disagreement. I think it's just a very nuanced case where, yeah, I don't think there is. You're going to, because of broader structural issues surrounding like news literacy and the belief that we can all kind of come and approach the news, and based off of reading 1 or 2 things, not everyone checks sources or kind of takes a step back and pauses. That's why, like, to some extent, just speaking to a camera in front of YouTube requires an amount of composure, John, that I think a lot of people respect you for. But you're gonna see people who are reading these reports out of context. And I just got something from my mom last night, who my entire family through our health insurance provider got the Moderna vaccine. And for her, she was reading that the mRNA type vaccines are only good for about 6 months. So she's thinking that she's gonna actually get like a 3rd round, right? But the truth is that like the science can say it's good for at least 6 months, maybe more, but the trial hasn't gone that far yet, so we're not going to be able to like say for sure, totally. You know? And so those are nuances that get lost when we kind of just have this like everyday reading of the news that we work on, as opposed to trying to take these things as like soberly as we can. But yeah, you're right. Like a lot of people are going to see this news and they're going to be kind of afraid of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That being said, a lot of people were like, oh, mRNA vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna are new, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is one shot, and I just want the one shot to go with it. So it's going to deter some people, but others it won't. It's just that like these things are messy. Like it's hard to manufacture things at scale quickly and not have problems. It's an extra level of concern because this is biological things that we're injecting into our body, which is why I think that so far it seems that Johnson & Johnson and the federal government are taking the proper precautions. And at least right now, I don't suspect something where it's like Johnson & Johnson's like Boeing, and they were trying to work with the federal government to make sure that they could fast track their approval, knowing that there were these issues and problems. Kind of like you said earlier, there's hopefully not, but like you said earlier, there's blood clots and these things like that happen in a lot of other different cases as well. So it's good they're being safe. I applaud them for being safe, but it is what it is.
Yeah. And the only other thing I would add is Dan's entirely right. This is nuanced. Well, like this is nuanced. I'm not worried about this. I'm not worried about necessarily their statements or our conversation. We're trying to be nuanced because we don't want people to get sick from either COVID or from blood clots. My worry is that it will stop being nuanced probably right now on Fox, definitely tonight. How do you think Tucker Carlson's coverage of this announcement will go? Do you think it will be nuanced? He's been fear-mongering about the vaccine for months. Candace Owens, who has millions of followers and has become a massive anti-vaxxer, is she gonna be nuanced? That would be my fear. Now,
fair enough.
The thing that's my fear. So then the counterpart to that is nobody watching them was going to get it anyway because they've already been scared away from the vaccine. So I don't know, there's a lot of things working back and forth. What I will say though is when I hadn't yet gotten the vaccine, like this viral thread went around, Dan, that Cal State LA had you could get it there. And a bunch of people tagged me on it, which is so nice that people on the internet care if I get the vaccine. And then as soon as this story came out this morning, tons of people sent it to me. John, I heard that you got the Johnson & Johnson. Are you worried about this? That is so sweet that all these people are worried about me getting a blood clot. I'm taking it easy. We're gonna see what happens. I don't fit the profile for the people who got it. And I got news for you. If I get a blood clot, it's more likely all the other things I've done to my body through the course of my life. There's a lot of stuff.
Well, anyway. Folks, I've seen John's desk when it's a tough week and he needs his snacks. There's a lot other things coming in John's direction besides this vaccine. But thank you for the concern.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. I think we have time for one more quick story. Let's run right into this. After the Capitol attack on January 6th, plenty of Republicans were totally down for it. Plenty of those in right-wing media began defending it. Tucker Carlson has tried to pretend that it was nothing this whole time. Others try to get silent, apparently thinking that they could just duck their head down and not deal with what had become of the Republican Party. There were a few, though, who wanted cred. They wanted credit for taking it seriously. And how long has that lasted? Well, let's take a look at what Nikki Haley is saying these days about President Trump, saying, I would not run in 2024 if President Trump ran, and I would talk to him about it. That's something that we will have a conversation about at some point. She said she would support him. Quote, that's something we will have a conversation about. If that decision is something that has to be made, I had a great working relationship with him. I appreciated the way he let me do my job. That's what she's saying now. I wouldn't run against him. I'll talk to him. He's great. Great working relationship. Right after the attack, though, she said, we need to acknowledge he let us down. He went down a path he shouldn't have, and we shouldn't have followed him, and we shouldn't have listened to him. And we can't let that ever happen again. He's not gonna run for federal office again. I don't think he's going to be in the picture. I don't think he can. He's fallen so far. His actions since election day will be judged harshly by history. So Dan, there's been a lot of movement on her position between February and mid-April. From you will be scorned by history to maybe I can be in your administration again.
Like left is best, left is best, left is best. Because all of us, like we knew this from the beginning. Like we said that the more time goes from these events that happened in the January 6th, like Capitol insurrection, the more people are gonna start forgetting about it, and people are gonna, especially people in the Republican Party, are gonna start to be able to read the tea leaves as to where the party is moving. And I'll admit this kind of, I guess like afterglow period of the election, let's say, when they lost everything. Usually, like, in 2012, the Republicans had this like diagnosis of how they could win with Latinos, then promptly burned it in the garbage. And like they did all these other different tactics to kind of look inwards and see what they could do as a Republican Party. This time, there was nothing to look inwards to because Trump blew everything up. But like, as the smoke started clearing, you just saw Trump giving his like dementia-addled speeches at Mar-a-Lago, playing the hits about like Mueller and Obama's birth certificate, and doing all those things, getting his Type 5 together. So that, and sorry, I'm being unfair to the Republican Party. That and cancel culture is basically the Republican Party right now as it exists. And so knowing that, Nikki Haley went from her original opinion, which when we start citing these quotes years and years in the future, let's all remember that these quotes about Republicans speaking bad about Trump come from January 2021 to like February 20th, 2021, and not a day afterwards. They're reading the tea leaves, just like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley were a little bit bullish on earlier. And they think that the future of the Republican Party, if not Trump, is Trumpism. And Nikki Haley, during the Trump administration, there were some rumors that Trump would get rid of Pence and run Nikki Haley as a VP pick. So there's some like things that maybe she could be prominent in that thing if she allies to Trump right now and makes the Trump people know that, okay, Nikki Haley has got our side. She's with our fight. We understand the Trump fight and struggle is full of a lot of like racism and bigotry and all those other different things. But I mean, again, Nikki Haley's just playing her card. She's doing the dance, as John Boehner talked about, that politicians tend to do when they're trying to figure out what people they can get power from and how to pander to them as much as possible.
Yeah, you're right. I remember those rumors about Pence and Haley. You know who else remembers that? Nikki Haley. She's definitely thinking about that right now. Yeah, this guy that like, he's fallen so far. Hey, Trump, can I fall with you? Like, maybe we can rise up someday. That's all it is. Look, there's we have to start like writing down our lessons of politics, but the most fundamental one is just wait. If you're a politician, no matter what you do, just wait, and eventually it'll all be okay. So they waited to see, would America and politics and all of that turn irreparably against Donald Trump? Would the Republican base realize, oh my God, where have we gone? We're sacking the Capitol? No, they didn't, and so now everything's good with Trump again. Cuomo, he was facing a lot of pressure to resign. He just waited, and how's he doing now? He's fine. He's fine. He'll be just okay. Matt Gaetz, we'll see. He's not resigning. He'll probably just be okay. I mean, this is the number one rule. Just wait, and anything can be absolved. Sexual harassment complaints, treason against the Republic. Like, we can forget all of this stuff if you just have a bit of patience. And Nikki Haley, like, she cares more about her career than about what another Trump campaign or presidency would mean. And he doesn't even have to win to do more damage. If he does run again, I mean, think about what will be done by him, by his followers, by state Republican parties, trying to make it easier for him to potentially win. It is going to be utter chaos, and she is totally down for that.
Yeah, the blatant sort of like cynicism that we see with these politicians as they are trying to get power, combined with how quickly we forget about these things, and the things they do that we should try to replace them for. Like, it would be such a funny sort of thing, like a sitcom sort of thing, if it wasn't like one of the things that will lead to the destruction of this country over time. Is that like, we can see this from a mile away. This is going to end poorly.
Exactly. Yeah, that's gonna be the new tagline of the Damage Report. This is going poorly. Anyway, I think we have the poll results, so why don't we bring those in and see what you all think. Will the Brooklyn Center police officer who killed Daunte Wright be fired? Well, 23.62% of you said yes. 76.38% said no. Well, that is a more, I guess, optimistic answer than I would have thought. I thought it'd be like 9-1 no, but no, a quarter of you thought she'd be fired. Well, it turned out you were wrong because she resigned, you big dummies. Anyway, maybe it's the same thing. Maybe she was pressured to resign. Again, like, I don't know, maybe she doesn't get that lesson of American politics that we were talking about, that you just wait and see what happens. But so she has resigned. So I look forward to her being hired by the next town over. And that'll be fun, Dan. That'll be fun. Were you surprised by the results?
Yeah, a little. I expected more of the proportions that you said there, John. But yeah, I think the collusion that we did with the Brooklyn Center Police Department on when we released the poll and then when that date happened may have spoiled the ballot a little bit. So I'm gonna call someone in Georgia to see if we can find some votes.
Exactly. Well, that's all the time we have, Dan. Until next time, where can people watch more of your amazing content?
Just find me on Twitter at Dan from the Web. Check out Power Report and Audio Face. But yeah, said it before, say it again. Thank you very much, John, for having me on. Appreciate you.
Awesome. Anytime. Miss you, buddy. As we discussed last week, the Amazon unionization effort in Alabama obviously didn't go the way union advocates wanted, but there's a lot more to the story, both about what the actual conditions were like in that area, some of the tactics used by Amazon to try to pressure workers to turn against the union. And joining us now to discuss a number of different topics is writer and public policy attorney, returning to the show once again, Malaika Jabali. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you back on. As we were talking about before the show, you're actually doing similar sort of work right now. So there's definitely a consistent theme to your work, and we appreciate you taking time out to join us.
No problem.
So you actually visited the warehouse in question. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yes, I really was trying to capture kind of a day in the life of what some workers have to experience. And I wasn't trying to, see what were the most sensational stories. I think people know the most egregious conduct that Amazon workers have had to face. But what are some of the little nuances and daily annoyances that enter people's lives? So I was actually in Atlanta around the last day of the vote. So the last day was on March 29th. That was the last day they were going to be accepting the ballots. And right when you pull up, there is a officer who's at the gate. So they've got a cop car that's right at the gate. There's another cop car that goes around and patrols the parking lot. They have private security that comes and they check people's license plates or just to look for random traffic violations. So there's always this, not always, but for the day that I was there, the afternoon that I spent there was a sense of constant surveillance. And when I went towards kind of where some workers were congregating, I just wanted to ask them, what do you think about the status of things? How do you feel about it? A number of people, I was surprised, were open to talking to me. There are reports that, younger workers there are more reticent about the idea of a union, but I had people who were very animated about saying, absolutely, we need something done here. And these are folks who are like under 30, under 35. Yeah. So they're just like little daily nuisances that I think people don't necessarily think about when it comes to some of this work.
Interesting. Yeah, so look, in the wake of the vote, obviously it didn't go the way I might have preferred. I can only speak for myself that I would have preferred. So I've been trying to work through what are some of the potential influences on that. Is it growing up with a lifetime of anti-union propaganda? Is it particular concerns with the union in this case? Is it that the working conditions aren't as bad as they've made out to be? So you mentioned the surveillance. Did the workers that you speak to, were they satisfied with the way they're treated, their scheduling, the conditions and benefits and all of that?
Of the people who opened up to me, not a single person said that they were satisfied with, that they were content with the way things were. The most I got was, it's okay. Universally from the people who were willing to talk, they were concerned about the shifts. They work 10-hour shifts. They might get 2 30-minute breaks. And I think for some Americans, like that's perfectly normal. That's great. And that should not be considered normal activity, because the problem is, especially if you only get, some people are saying even if it's just a 1 hour break where it's condensed together, like that's better than 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, you can barely even go outside of the parking lot. And so most people don't. They go outside. It's the Alabama heat. 68 degrees is nothing. But when you're sitting in your car, that thing heats up. So it's actually, it feels hot. Under an Alabama sun, you're out in the air. It is hot. So you have to go to your car. You have to run the gas. So that's even more, more expenses that you have to think about. And you can only just roll up your windows, turn on the AC, sit there, and then come right back. Because by the time you get out to that large parking lot and walk back, that's already like 10 minutes right there. So there's barely any time. So they said even if they had an hour, like that would be beneficial. So most people talked about the breaks, being able to have like a longer break. And if you don't mind, I'm actually at another organizing base right now. I'm in Joliet, Illinois. And so I'm with a group of warehouse workers. This is their first training day. They're learning how to organize other workers. So if you hear noises in the background, that's them doing their orientation sessions.
No worries.
So yeah, everybody I talked to was open about improving the conditions.
And what about, you implied that there were some that you spoke to that were against the unionization. What were some of the reasons that were given from the people that you were able to talk to?
Well, it wasn't necessarily that they were against unionizing. A few people that I spoke to said they just didn't have enough information. Where they might have gotten a call, but they're, when people are getting calls in the evening, like you're kind of winding down from work. You don't necessarily want to hear a spiel. So it's my sense is that some of it just probably took a little bit more contact. There's this really, really great article. I would suggest people read it, called The Blowout in Bessemer. That's the main heading, and it's by Jane McGallivy. It's in The Nation, and it talks about some of these like small organizing things that end up being big. So door-to-door campaigning, something that she talked about, is really important. And because of COVID, people are reluctant to go out in the field, but that's really kind of what it takes. So if you're just doing these house calls and not necessarily going to people's homes and saying this is important, it might just slip past people's fingers. So it's not necessarily antagonism. Some of it could just be apathy in a way, and you're doing other things.
Yeah, no, well, I know in the wake of the vote, even before the vote was finalized, some of the activists were saying they're going to be appealing the vote. They talked about the pressure that was put on workers, and maybe a bit of that we got into with the sense of surveillance, as if an Amazon facility needed you thinking about that there might be surveillance on top of their normal technology. Were you able to talk to any of the organizers? Is it possible that the sort of advice that you were just giving there might be incorporated into some sort of follow-up effort to try to unionize later on?
I'm trying to get in touch with the organizers. I attempted to before I left out. Of course, they're right in the middle of a campaign, so it was a little bit difficult to nab them on their strategies. But this is like ongoing work for me. I've been shadowing and reporting on warehouse workers for, I would say, about 2 years now. I first came to Joliet, the city that I mentioned earlier. It's in Will County, which happens to be probably the largest logistics center in the country. So there's a lot of railways that intersect here. And because of that, there's like a history of doing like warehousing and warehouses in this region. So this is like an ongoing project for me, and I will update you when I talk to those organizers and see what their next steps are, because that is my next step.
Well, last question for you, and just this is, as you say, this is an area that you've worked in for a couple of years. It's something that you obviously care quite a bit about. Were you surprised at how it turned out in Bessemer? Did you expect that they would vote for unionization?
I was leaning towards this being it being surprising if they did vote for it. I'm from the Deep South. The right to work propaganda is big in the South. We've been hearing, since I was a kid, that you need to be able to attract businesses down there, and there's so much land. And so Atlanta, for instance, which is only about 2 hours away, about maybe 2 to 3 hours away from Birmingham, this region attracts so many businesses, and we've had so many Fortune 500 companies because that's what we're told is the economic engine. You have to make it friendly for businesses. And if there's propaganda that you won't have a job at all, like let alone a job that doesn't really give you breaks, then that's going to be a disincentive for some people. So it wasn't a big surprise to me understanding the tradition, even teachers in the South. My mom's is a school teacher. In the midst of COVID, like they had difficulty wanting to organize about not going back to school because it's a right to work state and they don't have teachers unions.
Yeah. A lot of issues obviously making it difficult down there. Hopefully the unions are incorporating this, but we appreciate you joining us to tell us about your experience. Depending on what you find in your current operation that you're on right there, maybe we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, and I just want to shout out one of the warehouse workers I've been, who I started talking to actually 2 years ago, Mark Ballantyne. He had a great interview in Jacobin. I recommend everybody read it. They basically just quoted him word for word, and it really gives you a sense of some of the egregious nature of like the anti-organizing work that companies like Amazon and other Fortune 500 companies do against these workers.
Awesome. Malaika, Jabali, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.